A lot of my bias happened in Utah. It's been a blessing and a curse because now I question everything.
There's such a difference when I see people study comedy or people just naturally just super funny.
Was after I got divorced from my first wife, I got excommunicated.
Why do you keep going back? We're both raised in the local faith, which was the LDS religion.
And I say this respectfully, I don't mean this for anybody else, but I was like, oh, this doesn't add up for me anymore.
Spirituality and capitalism belong together. Those thoughts, those feelings, that comes from something bigger than I am. And together I believe we can all grow. That's how we're going to change the world. That's how we're going to change the planet.
So I'm sitting here today with Bryce Prescott, and he's agreed to be over here with us on the Spiritual Capitalist. And I appreciate your time today, Bryce.
It's a pleasure to be here, Dalton.
Thanks, man. I really do appreciate you taking the time to come out here and sit and have some conversations about places where we both came from, which is Utah, which has its own culture for sure.
Flavor. It's got a flavor, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it
it's
does.
very bland, but it's a flavor.
I mean, it depends where you live in Salt Lake. You can kind of get a little of that flavor of the air, depending upon where you're at.
Yeah.
So
Sriracha, I think is what it is.
I'm here in Scottsdale, so it's not the same over here, but
Got it.
I do appreciate it. So, Bryce, you've been on how many podcasts do you think? I mean, this is something that you've seemed to have been doing a long time now.
Yeah, well, podcasting is my business. Like I'm a founder of a company called Media Automated, and so either shows that I've been on and guested on, it's well over 100, and then shows that I've either been a part of or episodes produced or whatever, it's over 10,000 as far as like my reach into this space.
10,000.
Yeah, I added it up about a year ago, and with everything that I've done with all the podcasts we've ever done, it was over 10,000 episodes.
You've put in a lot of reps. I mean,
some miles, yeah.
That's not a small amount. I mean, I was actually talking recently with a gentleman, and he was explaining to me, people that start YouTube channels and do those types of things that, it takes 500, 600, 700 episodes, 1,000 episodes to get any type of real movement. Do you notice the same thing is true with podcasting?
Yeah, but not for the reasons most think. I've seen that just because people suck at it at first. And so they've got to get the reps in to be able to understand the dynamics and the power in silence and understanding how to redirect a errant guest and all those things. So, well, there's no real set time or number, but you got to put in some time to get it. I've seen people, even in my own business, where if you learn properly up front and then you transition certain skills that you might already have, like public speaking, and into the right avenue, you can have a very successful show immediately, like the Spiritual Capitalist, of course.
Well, that is the hope, right? That's the hope that we're bringing here is to be able to combine those two things. But what do you see that actually makes a show successful, right? So we're talking 10,000 episodes. Yeah. You've had to have a handful of those that did really well.
Yeah.
What made them well? Like if someone's saying, hey, I'm at home, because it seems like everybody now, you say, hey, are you running a podcast? And it's before there wasn't very many people.
Sure.
But now there's a lot of people that have podcasts for either their business or their personal brand. What makes or breaks these things, even if they're putting in the reps?
Let me make sure that I'm clear about something. So my personal shows and my personal appearances, I've been a guest over 100 times on different podcasts. My own shows that I've had, and I've had 3 of them over the years, I'm well into 1,500 episodes myself of being the person behind the mic.
Oh, okay.
And then my company, we've produced over 10,000 episodes, which means I've had a behind-the-scenes view to a bunch of different shit shows and great shows and the whole thing. I think that 2 things are missed. That when you get these things, it makes a massive difference. First of all, you got to realize you're there to entertain. So you got to be entertaining. And then secondly, you're there to solve a problem of some kind. People listen to podcasts because they're looking for an answer of something. They're looking to be sedated or distracted from their current life, which is in itself the solving of a problem. So you're entertaining, you're problem solving. You've got to give them something that works for them. One of the biggest mistakes I've seen a lot of podcasters make is that they overlook that. They make the show for themselves, and then they burn out because nobody cares. And they, disparage the entire platform, and medium is something that went wrong, and that podcasting isn't as cool as everybody said, and it's not that at all. It's that they didn't make a show somebody wanted to watch or listen to.
And so you had no purpose in the beginning of doing it.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't think anything. I mean, if you start a business, it's the exact same thing. If you're creating a product that nobody wants, why would you be doing it? And if you're creating a product just for you, typically people aren't going to be buying it. Right. So I think it's kind of one of the same things, right? Like how do you make sure that you're doing something that's impactful, that you're passionate about doing, and also is going to make an impact on other people's lives. Because for me, if I believe someone's going to be listening and they're going to be paying attention and taking down notes, that'll be something that they can actually apply in their own lives. Because I think everyone's looking for those answers, or looking for, some type of solution, or they're just looking to be entertained, with what you do, which could be comedy, or it could be telling your life stories, or, sharing anecdotes with, friends and different people like that. So how did you get into podcasting?
I stumbled into it, actually. The career that I was in at the time, I was, for lack of a better description, I was a commodities trader. Not a formal one. It was more of a broker, in that I had a big book of contacts that were in South America from my time as a Mormon missionary there back in the day. And I met up with this guy that had a bunch of contacts in Southeast Asia, and we were trying to broker deals for commodities that, 25,000 metric tons of sugar or whatever. And it was potentially very lucrative. I never made any real money on it. I pretty much burned through my entire bankroll the 2 years that I was devoted to that. And my foray into podcasting started at the end of it. I remember it vividly, man. I was sitting in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I was half drunk in a bar with a steak in my belly. And we had just got hoodwinked by this group of business people out of Southeast Asia we flew them down there on our dime, under the agreement that if we had the product that we had said we had, they would go under contract with us. They had shown us their banking instruments. We had a draft contract, the whole deal. Well, we find out when we're there that they're seeing 5 other people as well on our dime, and they chose to go with somebody else. And so I'm pissed. And I'm having this existential moment where I had already made a ton of money in real estate before I got into commodities. Then I get into commodities, and I'm swinging for the fence, trying to make 6 and 7 figure transactional commissions on each one. And I'm having this moment because I'd been burned over the course of the 2 years. It was the last deal I was a part of, the last time I was in Brazil. And I'm like, I don't know what I thought I knew. I have zero understanding of what is actually going on in the world of business and the world of loyalty and commodities, everything. And I thought, I need a way to learn. And I had already become a podcast listener this was in 2012, I believe. And I had already been a listener. I'd listened to the Joe Rogan Experience. There was one of my favorite actors, a guy named Jerry Ferrara. He was Turtle in the movie Entourage. He had a podcast called Bad for Business that was a really interesting thing, and he told a lot of Hollywood stories about Entourage and the show. I had listened to Tim Ferriss's podcast, and I loved this idea, and I've always been somebody that was willing to speak. And so I came home and I started researching, like, how do I get into this? It seemed like, because I was broke at the time after this whole thing went down, and I thought, I've got to have an angle to be able to have access to really influential people without having to pay them. And I thought, well, I'll build a platform where they could come be on my show, and then I can help them be exposed in whatever way they want to other people. Or if there's in the case of, like, I actually had Jerry Ferrara on my podcast. He didn't get anything from me. I just got some stuff from him, and it helped me to grow because of his willingness to be on my show. So it was back then, and I realized very quickly that this medium was going to change, because I could kind of see how technology was going to make it easier to access this stuff. And even then, even though it's way simpler now, it still was relatively easy. I mean, programs like GarageBand were still available back then, and you could get a simple USB mic and plug it into your laptop and talk. And back then, Skype, there was these plugins where you could have somebody on the other end of your Skype and record it multi-track on your GarageBand. And so I just learned myself. I went to YouTube University, figured it all out, started a podcast that was called Rules of Success. And I used it as a way to network and connect with really successful people. And I had that show for 6-7 years.
I love it. I love it. I remember listening to Tim Ferriss when I was younger. Guy changed my life. Just his thoughts and the way that he put those things together, and how he was able to bring in so many unique people from Google and, his mindset. And it's interesting to see where he's kind of changed his mindset. He was very much about doing a lot of investments and all that. Now he's kind of gone into maps and about psychedelics. And so it's fascinating to see that some of these people are able to really change the landscape of what, I would say that what media, like what the mainstream media shows. And all of a sudden you have these people that were really nobody knew who they were, really. I mean, nobody knew who you were at one point in time. And then all of a sudden, over a long period of time, people just seem to resonate with who you are, or who Tim was, and all these different people, which then allows the ability to be able to get your message out there, or to be able to, create influence. You got to pardon me for a second. I'm losing my voice.
For sure, man. I think that's one of the beauties of podcasting as a medium is that when it's done right, it allows you to present something to somebody that they can listen to on their terms. They can decide how engaged they want to be or not with no risk to them. If they turn off your show, it doesn't matter. They're not hurting anybody's feelings. And they can use it as a source of, like I said, problem solving. They've got issues with whatever. They can go find a podcast that was made about that specific topic and learn.
Yeah.
And it's accessible. And that's the other thing is that we're filming this, obviously. But podcasting got its origins in audio. And audio is passive. So if you can listen to something passively while you're doing other things, you can double up your efforts. And that's why I think there's been such a the stable, even with YouTube and everything, the stable numbers of podcasting is still in audio. Like if you like, I'll see this with my clients. They'll have a YouTube channel that's reasonably popular, and the numbers on their listens are 10 to 1 to what their their views are. So yeah, I mean, it's still. I don't think that we can underestimate the power of passive audio listening.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, if I look at myself as a listener, active listener, I'm usually, 1.5, like as far as on the speed goes. I'm doing something else. I'm writing down notes. So I could see that being really the case and why like somebody would do that. Who do you think? I know that there's a I've heard recently that like if you're going to start a podcast or you're going to do something like that, really there's only a handful of reasons. One, if you have a message you want to get out there, that's a way you could do that. Another reason could be that you're trying to attract your ideal clients, so you have them onto your show. You might have somewhat of a message or a movement that you want to get out there, or you just simply want to, basically tell more about your company. What are the other reasons people would want to have a podcast that would be powerful?
Well, like for example, one of my big hobbies is I'm a stand-up comedian. And so having a comedy podcast gives people access to my personality and I can make them laugh, and it's an entertainment, and it's a way to have them escape. That's one reason. Another reason is commentary. There is a lot going on in our world right now, politically, with governments, with conspiracies, and you can get on there and ramble. I mean, there's a little bit of fear associated with how they've been shutting down some of those
for sure. A lot of it right now.
Narratives. But in concept, I believe that we're still a nation that the First Amendment applies, and so, we can do that. I wanted to clarify something that I heard you say in that it's not about one of the things that you, of course, can attract your ideal client, not to so much be on your show, but to hire you. So when you present messaging that solves a problem for clients and you can create it in a way that has a narrative, meaning that there's pieces of what you do best intertwined in each episode as they binge, you'll get people to want to hire you because, again, they're listening on their terms. They're seeing if they like you. They understand your sensibilities. As they listen to you, they get to know you. And so if you do it right, you can have it be a massive lead generator.
I love it. How are you merging comedy with business, though? Because I know you love comedy, and you did Wise Guys in Salt Lake City, quite a bit, right? Like you're kind of...
Well, I just moved here to Scottsdale, and my last hurrah weekend was I headlined the Ogden Club.
Oh, you did?
In
Nice.
Ogden, yeah. So Friday, Saturday night. How I've used it to, I came at it a different way. Me getting into comedy basically allowed me permission in a business sense just to be myself. Because I've always been, I enjoy things like self-development and growth, and I want to put myself in the best position to have the best life, which includes fitness, and includes spirituality, and includes caring for my relationships in a healthy and honorable way. And at the same time, I like dick jokes and cracking them and
Sure.
making people laugh. And without it publicly being known that I do that, it's a weird thing if I just start cracking dirty jokes or whatever in a business setting, like, this guy's, what's his story? But because I am that now, it's a different sort of experience. And I'll say this, and I don't say this with any sort of ego. I say this just with the reality. It's made me interesting to people because they're like, who's this guy? I clearly have, when you see me perform stand-up comedy, I'm funny. And I clearly know how to tell a good story, and I can keep you engaged as a crowd, and I just play that fiddle up there while I'm getting you to laugh. But then I can step out of that, and I can talk about really serious subjects related to our own personal growth and development, and things like NLP and business success and financial strategies and things. And so,
do you do that in your comedy shows? Do you merge the two together, like that you're trying to send a message to them at the same time as you're trying to tell dick jokes?
Kind of. That is in the comedic standpoint, that's a muscle that I'm learning how to flex. the idea of being able to have funny commentary that's poignant and at the same time like gets you thinking and laughing, it's very, very difficult. And I've started to broach that. My comedy has been mostly about my family and things, but yet it'll allow me to have these little cultural offshoots. Like as an example, I have daughters that are, I'll just say this, both of my daughters are a part of the LGBTQIA community, right?
Yep.
So I can tell stories about my daughters and their experiences and then kind of veer off and talk about my commentary of specific things related to that culturally and personally that I've had to deal with that are hilarious, but yet really shine a light oftentimes into the absurdity of things that are in that realm. So it's ideally, I would love to continue to develop my skills up to where I could be more politically active in my comedy and I could have there be things that are more culturally expressed. But right now I've used just my family and my own experiences to tell funny jokes and stories.
Is that always been kind of who you were? You just loved cracking jokes, or is this something you really like personal development or like anything, right? Whether it be training, fitness, whatever, how we have to continue to put in the reps and we have to work hard on doing these things or doing the work, I should say. Is that something that came natural to you that you were like, oh, I just want to do this because I've always been funny? Or is this something you've actually studied the craft of it? Because there's such a difference when I see people study comedy or people just naturally just super funny.
It's both. So comedically, I was always a better counterpuncher than I was a puncher. Like I could make a quick quip easily, way more simply than I could being the guy up front that said the funny thing.
Right.
And so, but that doesn't work on stage because there's nobody up there that's giving you the punch to duck and swing after.
Yeah.
So I had to learn, I had to study comedy and I still do, understanding just the framework of how to tell a good story and concepts like the left turn and setups and punchlines and the economy of words, how you can say too much and screw up your joke, or you can dial it back, say fewer words and have it be really funny. One of the things that has been one of my favorite things that I've learned is the power of silence. Silence is where the laughter happens. Like when you stop talking and you let them marinate on what you just told them, that's where the funny is. And I had to learn that. When I first started doing comedy, I would step on my own jokes and I would tell something funny, the crowd would laugh and I'd be into my next jokes already. And I wasn't good at understanding how to really gauge what they were going through because I didn't have that muscle. I didn't have that level of awareness yet. And I struggled with it at first because like I said, I did a little bit of coaching. I did some business consulting. I had the podcast that wasn't a comedy podcast before. And I wanted to let loose and be funny, but I held myself back because I felt that it was inappropriate. If I'm sitting, across the table, metaphorically speaking, from somebody and I'm helping him learn new communication skills to make his marriage better or how to get the resolve that he needs to make changes in his life, so I'm supporting him from a coaching standpoint, like being a smartass in that moment doesn't feel appropriate. And so, but I always had this sort of sense of humor about me. I've always been a big fan of comedy. When I was a younger kid, I would listen to the Sam Kinison record, ow, ow, ow. And then, Andrew Dice Clay with his nursery rhymes. And I'd listen to Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy. And I had all the dirty words in my head.
So you're listening to all the greats. You're listening to all the really dirty comedy of that time.
They're great comedians. Like they knew how to really tell a story and do it in a way that left you feeling like you knew him.
Yeah.
And I wanted that, but I didn't know how to broach it. And a turning point for me, there's a very interesting documentary series on HBO that I would recommend anybody watch. It's about Gary Shandling. If you know who Gary Shandling is, he's passed on now, but he was a very famous comedian for a long time. He was the creator and star of a show called The Larry Sanders Show on HBO in the 80s, I believe. And The Larry Sanders Show was the very first sort of docu-style show that was a television show akin to The Office or Parks and Rec and, that sort of style where there was the fourth wall and the cameras there and whatever. And he did that and he became very good at it. And he was a stand-up as well. He was an actor in some of the Iron Man movies and stuff. But there's this documentary, it's a 2-parter, 4 hours total on HBO called The Zen Diaries of Gary Shandling. And in this, you learn about this guy. He's a practicing Buddhist. He was a beloved character. He was really liked and loved by his friends because he was super kind. And he was a savage comic. And seeing this guy's life story, it bridged for me like, oh, that's me. Like I'm very similar to Gary Shandling in that I have a dramatic sort of flair sometimes. I love telling jokes. I do care about, peace and understanding and how to really make the best, but I like to make people laugh as well. And so it was seeing that documentary that inspired me to finally go try an open mic.
I love it. I love the fact that you found that inspiration and you said, hey, listen, like this guy reminds me of me. And I've wanted to do this for a long time because what you're doing, you're putting yourself out there. I mean, you're not kind of putting yourself out there. You're putting yourself on the stage. Yeah. You're hoping things are going to land. I'm sure they don't always land. And you've got to kind of have that thick skin. What I've noticed about a lot of comedians, because I used to hang out at comedian clubs in Salt Lake City, right? Some of the comic clubs out there. And most of the comedians I ever met, they were either pretty big drug addicts or they were highly depressed.
Yep.
And I always thought that was interesting. Like they were so depressed and they'd want to get up on stage and say the most crude things I can even think of. But yet they were highly depressed and they would still want to get on stage and do this and put themselves through this verbal battle, hoping that someone's going to laugh or they're going to shock somebody, which is what I saw a lot of. Would you say in your own personal life that you've dealt with some of those things as far as depression goes, and this is a way to help move some of that funny out? You know?
Absolutely. I didn't realize the extent of it until recently. One of my favorite comedians, who just happens to be a friend of mine as well, is a guy by the name of Chris D'Elia, and he got canceled a couple years ago, and it sent him into depression, and he started doing a lot of therapy. And he has used the therapy journey and having a son and getting married and things that happened while he's depressed or while he was canceled it's his new stand-up. Like he just released this new special recently. And there's a scene in it where he talks about how he's talking with his therapist and his therapist said, well, it makes sense that you're a comedian because you crave acceptance from people. You have inside of you this deep-seated unworthiness of being loved.
Ooh.
And
man.
And when you make somebody laugh, it makes you feel loved. You feel accepted by them.
Mm.
And so I didn't realize that was where I was coming from when I got into stand-up, but I realized that a lot of what I get from the crowd is validation. And it's an interesting thing for me because I don't ever want to support habits or things inside of me, belief systems or even programs that are mental that keep me in a place that's small. And I haven't figured out yet how to transition doing stand-up that's not from a place of need. Mm. And so they jokingly say that, all comics are messed up, and it's kind of true. There's something weird about most comedians. For me, on the flip side, though, I didn't really integrate that well into the scene. I had a gift that was funny. Because I have a business mind, I made a connection with the club owner in Salt Lake, and he respected me in a different way than other comics because of my acumen business-wise, and I appreciated what he built with his clubs, and I just see him as one of the most savvy business owners.
He's done a great job. I mean,
they're opening a Boise club now. There's a second one in Vegas.
They're great comedy clubs.
Wise Guys Comedy is where it's at. And so I had a home at Wise Guys, but I wasn't beloved by a lot of the other comedians because I wasn't poor, I wasn't an addict, I wasn't fat, I didn't have a bunch of stuff, but I still had this need for acceptance. And so I had to take extensive breaks over the time where I would take 2 or 3 months off from going down and doing stuff at the club because I just felt so unwelcome. And I hated how it felt in that way, but I still wanted the validation. And as I got better in my craft and started headlining more and building a fan base myself, I had a little bit more control about what I could do to create those experiences where I was, making people laugh. And
man, you're just a little masochistic. I mean, to go to a comedy club where like you're looking for acceptance, and then all of a sudden, even the comedians aren't accepting you, but you're still looking for that. I mean, that's like something internal inside of somebody that is. When I say masochistic, I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying that sometimes we have to be like. It's no different than starting a business, right? You've failed probably many times. You already talked about it before. I know I have, so I can relate on that one in a big way. And you're like, why do you keep going back? Because there's something else that's driving, something else that's bigger. I know we both came from Utah, right? Yep. We're both raised that way. We're both raised in the local faith, which was the LDS religion there for me anyways, when I was younger. And you said you went on a mission then.
I did, yeah.
So what was it like living in Utah that way? I mean,
Well, I didn't start in Utah. I moved to Utah after my mission.
well, you did. Okay.
I was in the Pacific Northwest there, and it was a different experience, but a lot of my bias happened in Utah. I got married very quickly after my mission, 5 weeks after my
That's the
mission.
way to do it, though.
It's not, though. I would not recommend that at all.
No, I'm just saying in Utah, that seems to be the way to do it, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of idiots, and I was one of them. And that marriage lasted 8 years, and it was the only reason it lasted that long is because we were workaholics and never saw each other the last 4 years of our marriage. And we had a baby, and anyway. But the cultural aspect of the religion in Utah I always found interesting because it was never really based in the doctrine or dogma of the church. It was this kind of
It's on its
whimsical
own.
story.
It's made its own thing. Yeah.
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 So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
No, yeah, no. It's so because when you come from Utah and you have those experiences and being Mormon and going through those things, I just ask you these things because I know that a lot of at least mine, a lot of my spirituality, some of my belief systems that came from that, they're still kind of part of me.
Sure.
Like I'm no longer LDS. I left the LDS religion when I was 13. So about 13, my mom said to me, hey, or no, I said to my mom, I'm like, listen, if I was born a Jew, would I be a Jew? She's like, yeah, probably. And then I said, well, what if I was born and I tell people Muslim? I don't exactly know what it was. She says, yeah. And at that moment in time, I realized I was only doing things because of how I was raised, not because of really what I believed, because I didn't know what I believed, right? And I find that Utah has a lot of ways of doing that, you know, as far as trying to put everybody kind of in the same, I guess, same dogma in a way, you know, from a cultural side of things. And so I wonder like how much that has affected, you know, your comedy, how much it's affected like your business and like where are you really at with that these days, right? Because I notice a lot of people have kind of transitioned out of that experience.
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking because I think, you know, you and I have similar experiences in that we both invested heavily in Upgrade, which is a mindset, mental programming, teaching, I guess, community, whatever you want, led by William Lamb and a few other really incredible rock stars in that place.
Mike Mahoney.
Yep. Brady Edwards, the guy that's associated with your show here.
Everything. Yeah, exactly. What a team, man. What an incredible team.
It's almost like you upgraded your team. Zing. Now, where I was going with that, though, is that I've found that a lot of the things I've had to root out of my mind and my behaviors and my programs were put there by the religion. So, like, for example, this is something that I've really been thinking about a lot even recently. And that is that if it wasn't for my connection to, and this has nothing to do specifically with LDS. This is just more any dogma, and it could not even be religion. It could be you're in the army. I mean,
yeah, sure, you get them everywhere.
Yeah, that there is I didn't understand the power of confirmation bias until I analyzed where my beliefs came from religiously. And one of the most detrimental things that I feel that I'm working through and rooting out now is that the idea that you could get a hint that something is true and then just blatantly accept everything as a whole truth.
Yeah, I've done that.
And it's so dangerous.
Of course it is.
And especially when it comes to all sorts of things like, let's be honest, in Utah, there is a weird relationship that they have with sex and marriage. You have these people that are getting married very, very young. They have no experience. They get a little taste of some trim, and then they realize, oh, that wasn't worth dealing with this bitch all the time. I need to get out of this now. And then they go on this thing where they just go plow through a bunch of chicks, and then they realize, oh, that didn't fill them up either.
Yeah, they lose their mind at that point in time. Yeah,
and that's directly from culturally their experience of what happened within that community. And so I look at that and I'm like, wow, there's so many things that I just blanketly took as truth that aren't even remotely close to being true that I get to now question. And so it's been a blessing and a curse because now I question everything. And I don't want to be a skeptic because I understand that skepticism projects skepticism on others, and that doesn't inspire confidence or success. And so it's been this interesting thing for me having to come to terms with that. Additionally, there's been other things relative to, like, you know, again, this isn't just specifically LDS. There's like the law of health and how you treat your body and things. And I found there to be so much hypocrisy associated with what's actual health. It's like I can be 10% body fat, work out 6 days a week, drink plenty of water, be shred city. But if I drink a couple shots of tequila, I'm a bad guy. Meanwhile, the guy that's 400 pounds that just had 6,000 calories of cake. He doesn't drink coffee. He's okay.
Right.
You know?
And drinking. And then on the other side, drinking Diet Coke for breakfast and for dinner and all that. There's a lot of things. I think it's in all dogma, right? It's in all these things. It's like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, right? And that's something that always kind of stuck with me. I'm like, okay, like how do you stay in that place of just being in a place of spirit and treating people the way you want to be treated and doing the things you want to do, but at the same time, having some level of consciousness about it and having a level of wisdom about those decisions so that it's not just some blanket statement. Yeah. And that happens a lot with dogma. It's like, because I believe this, then I believe all of this. And I know I'm guilty of it too. And that in my youth, I was like, oh, well, I believe this thing, so that must mean I believe all of these things, right? Which that doesn't make any sense. But I do think things like Upgrade, like we were talking about, that does kind of help start to shift the mindset that way. So
I just would like to add something to that. One of the really transformational experiences relative to my relationship with the church was after I got divorced from my first wife, I got excommunicated. And so I was in a position where now everything that I believed had been taken from me, and it was not an experience of love. It was very judgmental. It was hurtful. It was very difficult for me. I still remember it, August 22nd, 2004. Like it was a very difficult day because of so much of my identity and value system was built on being a member of the church. And a few months in, I mourned, and I had this experience where I decided to take an inventory of what I actually believe. Like I asked myself, do I actually believe that? Is that true? And I went down, in Mormonism, they have the articles of faith and all of the beliefs and all the other side things that are important and how we behave and act and what we think is, God's way. And I went through and I had my notebook out. I'm like, what do I actually believe? And for the first time in my adult life, I had a list now of the things that I believe this stuff. This stuff works for me. It makes sense. I have evidence it's true. I don't doubt it. And I was able then to jettison the other beliefs. Part of that experience came from reading an incredibly impactful book called Conversations with God, Book 1 by Neil Donald Walsh.
That book changed my life.
Mine too. It's on the Rushmore of books as far as like what changed me most.
So good.
And being in that position of like having to change my mindset about God as being somebody that is my friend and is a partner. And that this partner just happens to have a lot of cash, a lot of resource, a lot of ability to help me. And if I just played with him as a friend would, I get access to it too.
You can co-create.
I can co-create,
which is such a beautiful thing to do. So you get, at that point in time, you're excommunicated, which if people don't understand that means basically if you're Mormon or LDS, they basically say you're no longer Mormon, no longer LDS because of what happened. That's like a dark night of the soul. I mean, especially if you believe that. You know what I mean? If you believe that, then all of a sudden...
Well, I even went through the process. I was rebaptized, and even, as they say, got your blessings restored. And the moment when I got my blessings restored, I was in Salt Lake. I was meeting with the general authority. That was the moment where I realized, and I say this respectfully, I don't mean this for anybody else, but I was like, oh, this doesn't add up for me anymore.
So all the beliefs that you'd written down, which I love that you spent so much time asking yourself, do I really believe this? Does this make sense? Is this part of me? Are those things you still hold to be true today?
Yeah. Yeah, because there's certain aspects of even the church where it's like, I believe that there is a law of health for people, that there's a certain way to treat your body to which your body will then hold up its end of the bargain to live out its days in a way.
I do
now,
too.
I don't believe it's the same as what they profess. I believe in the concept of tithing, that if you take a portion of your means and you give it to things to which you know or you feel bring good, and you don't have control what happens to it, there's a certain amount of faith associated with that, and it's like a lubricant for blessings. It's like, I'm going to give this, I'm not going to stress it. It's my insurance policy for abundance. Like I believe in monogamy. I believe that is important, that we maintain relation. Like especially in Utah, there's tons of people with open marriages and this whole thing, and I'm like, I don't know how anybody does that and maintains any. And now there's certain people that I know personally that do it, and they seem to be okay. But like, there's a part of me that just doesn't believe they're actually okay.
I used to, there was a point in my life where I thought, and not that I took part of that, but there was a point in my life I thought, you know what? I think this makes the most amount of sense. I really did. I was like, I think this makes the most amount of sense. But then I've seen a lot of the communities that are, LS that are into these types of things. No judgments on them at all. Like, that's their life.
Right.
But it wouldn't work for me. And it seems to be, it's usually in people's marriages when it's almost at the end. Like when they're trying to hold it together, but they still want to
Well,
be
it's usually
together.
after an affair. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Somebody had an affair. The marriage is still connected. They don't want to let go of the marriage, but yet all of a sudden this wound has been opened up with the sexual intimacy there, and so they're like, "Hey, fair game," and they try it, and it's the end of the door. So many people that I know in Salt Lake that are in those type of marriages, you can tell that it's just a fuck fest at that point. They're not actually investing in the relationship personally. It's just it gives them a chance to have the safety of a companion. And let's be honest with it. Sometimes it's a financial component. Like they don't want to not have each other's money.
Yeah, no, I've seen that too. And the other thing too, I think is really interesting is that when you take dogma, when you take religion, but I do see it in Utah the most because that's where I'm at. That when people finally decide that they're going to leave the LDS church or something like excommunicated or whatever they make those decisions on, they go buck ass wild. They're like, I'm going to try drugs. I'm going to drink. I'm going to fuck. I'm going to do whatever I want to do. And I'm not going to kind of do it a little bit. Like I'm going to do like I'm in my 20s. But at this point in time, I'm in my 40s, my 50s, and I'm doing a lot of things that I could have done at this point in time in my life, but it's almost overboard because, and you can even see with pornography that's in Utah, like you can see all these things, like how much that organized religion, as much as I love those people that are in it and that's for them, but I see how destructive it also can be. Yeah. And that's sometimes extremely sad because I know these people are doing the best they can. I know they truly believe what they're doing. And I know they have a lot of love in their heart, but because when we oppress things so much or don't deal with them from a traumatic side of things, they just end up coming out one way or the other.
Well, I'll share this. When I went back through the process to get rebaptized, as they call it, and then the secondary process of getting, as they call it, my blessings restored, I spoke to my ecclesiastical leaders about the things I found when it came to my beliefs. And, I was even using alcohol at that point. They didn't care. Like I was like, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. And it was an interesting thing because it was like, they felt more like, dude, we can deal with that once you get back in.
Oh yeah.
And the irony now is that, that was, goodness, how long ago was that? That was 2009, 8? I can't remember. It was a long time ago that I got rebaptized. And the leniency now, like if you know people that are in the church and they don't excommunicate anybody anymore. I mean, it's way different. Back then, you sniffing a chick's panties, it's not your wife, and next thing you know, you're in the bishop's office. Now it's not the same. And it's peculiar because I'm like, oh, did they lose too many good people because they were really strict about this? And now they're faced with the reality. They're like, oh, we can't keep doing that, or we're going to be this certain demographic of membership or what? But
yeah, it's interesting because I look at, what we're focusing on here is spirituality and capitalism, right? Yeah. But what I notice a lot, unfortunately, in living in Utah and being part of that is I can count on jobs I actually lost. Like I was working with companies, and because I didn't have the priesthood, or I must be a terrible human being because I don't have the priesthood, or I don't have Jesus jammies on or any of those things. And they would look at me in such a unique way, like such a judgmental way. And I'm like, man, but yet then these are the guys I know that are doing some stuff that I just wouldn't be doing personally. Yeah. So there's such and I think it's in all cultures. It's just not Utah, but that's just like I said, it's what I know. But
humans love power, and anytime weak people can wield power, they will. And unfortunately, that happens in a lot of religions. You know? When you have like these schmucks that have some sort of leadership position wielding some sort of spiritual definition or conclusion over another person, that gets appealing to them. Like they get into it,
It's a pretty good business model.
It is. It's spiritually capitalistic if you think about it. Hey-o.
Slam. I was waiting for it. But it is. You baptize people, you get 10%, baptize more people, get 10%, take the 18-year-olds, send them out in the world and get.
I don't think they utilize they should offer discounts for tithing and stuff for good behavior.
Or maybe they
get
should
a punch card or something. I don't know, man.
They could just say, hey, listen, if they give 10%, then you get 10%, or you get 5%.
Well, dude, think about it. If you had like a punch card filled up for like good tithing for a year, and then you cheat on your wife and you go to the bishop's office, you're like, we're good, dude. And you walk out of there. They've got to thought about this, man. Like,
like we're losing lots of members.
Yeah.
There you go.
They get like a.
But yeah. Oh yeah. Well, don't even know where to go with that one.
But no, I am so thankful for my experiences, as a young man. I grew up with that. It gave me purpose. It gave me a community to be a part of, which taught me leadership skills. It taught me how to do things I wasn't comfortable with. It taught me how to exercise faith in something I didn't understand. And, when I served my mission, it was a beautiful thing because I got to go and learn a foreign language. I got to experience a foreign culture. I served my mission in Brazil, which ended up serving me in my business life after the fact, as you heard me talk about Sao Paulo. I don't have any regrets associated with it. I wish that it could have been different for me in some aspects, but it's not a regret. It's more of just like, But at the same time, like, I feel like I kind of got off light with some of the crap that I had to deal with in my head.
I love your journey, man. I love the journey that you were like, look, that is one of the things I do love about the LDS Church is that they have an amazing community. They do. Like an amazing community. They did a lot of stuff with the Boy Scout program. Like it created a community, which a lot of places don't have. And so I think that's why a lot of people stay in there too, because they have a community. And for you to have such gratitude and to be able to say, hey, listen, this was just part of my journey. It's part of my story. It's part of my experience, and to where it led you, which is now like you're doing all these different podcasts and you're doing comedy and, having a good time doing it. Now moving to Scottsdale. What's next for you?
What's next for me? More of the same. I mean, I had one of our mutual friends, John Madsen, I had a conversation with him at the last Upgrade event, and he was talking about that, when you move here, you got to let the old version of you die, and you get to start over as a new person. And I've chosen to do that. I feel a more acute sense of my own strengths and weaknesses, and a more acute sense of the things that I do that doesn't honor the best version of myself and doing the things that do. And so that means, my company, Media Automated, I've got some pretty lofty goals and things that I want to do with that in the media space, the podcasting space, the authority and branding space. I have this vision of myself selling out theaters with comedy, and so it's my intention to really integrate into the scene here as far as going and doing more stand-up and getting shows here locally and everything, and just kind of growing the wealth of those skill sets and turning them into something that's really more powerful. Admittedly, I feel out of the loop here, and I feel a little bit kind of metaphorically underdressed here in Scottsdale because I limped into here, man. Like we barely made it. And we're here, and I'm thankful for it. And now it's time to, really batten down the hatches and to build.
Well, you've made a commitment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I've noticed my whole life, it seems, anytime I make a commitment, universe, whatever, says, how bad do you want it? And there's a lot of things that have to die in order to get there. A lot of the versions that have to die in order to get there to be able to be that version, And one of the things they talk about in Upgrade is that at that point in time, when you move yourself into a different environment, that everything can change because you don't know anything. I mean, you've lived overseas, you walk into a new area and you're like, wait a minute, where's home? What is this? What are they speaking? What's this food? But slowly.
And that's just Orem.
Very yeah, that has nothing to do with overseas. So, and I think that's really what makes things so beautiful though in that journey is that like we get to shed off the old parts of ourselves and move into the new areas. So with all the things you've done, what is it that when all's said and done, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered as somebody that when people were in my presence, they felt that they were accessing a better version of themselves. I want to uplift people and have it be that when I'm there, the memories of me are memories of laughs and of good times, of empowerment, that I know about myself already that I have a very contagious energy when I let it out. Like you said, I can be reserved and whatnot, but when I let it out, I'm very magnetic and charismatic. And I want to be more of that, not for myself though, but because I see how it unlocks and gives other people permission to feed those parts of themselves that they might have fear in feeding, like I did with comedy. I started comedy when I was 41 years old, which I was fine with when I found out that the great Rodney Dangerfield didn't start till he was in his late 50s. And so I'm like, hey, if he can do that, I got
Yeah. So
my wife, hey.
Man, I remember Rodney Dangerfield, old movies and stuff.
He's the best.
He was funny, man. I think that I love it. Like I love the seriousness in you. I love the comedy side of you. Like I love to see like when you open up, and it's really beautiful. And I appreciate your journey, and I appreciate your experience. I appreciate you coming out here. And I do know that when we visualize something, we see something, we put enough energy towards it, then we accomplish those things. And you've shown that. You know what I mean? You knew you were going to be here, and here you are in Scottsdale. You're here with your wife and your family, and you're making it happen, and you're letting those old parts go. And I think that it just shows a commitment. And when we show that commitment, then it's almost like everything has to align for us anyways, no matter what. Like because we're continuing to show the commitment, we're showing up, you're putting in the sets, like literally, and you're continuing to move down this path. And I think you're also visionary. You see things that most people don't see. I mean, you saw podcasting when people are like, what is this thing? You're like, not exactly sure, but I know it's something. And now everybody knows what podcasting is. I mean, look at Joe, look at the Joe Rogan experience. Look at Tim Ferriss we talked about before. Like these people are celebrities. I mean, they're well known throughout the world.
Well, who knew that it was going to save the world, that it was going to be access
Absolutely.
to suppressed information and narratives that are true as opposed to the one that's fed by the state and the media,
That's
it's
what I
a
love
beautiful
about
thing, man. I'm so grateful to be in this game.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Well, so if anybody wants to find you, Bryce, they want to they want to say, listen, I want to know exactly how to sound good on a mic. I want to put something together. I want some life coaching, any of those types of things. How do they find you?
The simplest way to find me is just on social media. My handle on Instagram is just my name, @Bryce Prescott. And I answer all my DMs.
Perfect, man.
So that's
the
easiest.
I really do appreciate you coming out here. I appreciate you sharing your soul, your vulnerability, and being really raw with us.
You got it, man.
And really tying those things in and showing people that they can be whatever they want to be, no matter where they come from.
Thanks, man. I appreciate the chance.
No problem,
to be
man. Thanks, brother.
Here. Yeah.